I just want to make it clear, like nothing here you can't get by without. Some of these are just cool tools, and we can talk a little more about them, and people can ask questions. Um, some of them are redundant in a lot of ways and do the same feature, but I have extras of them, so I kind of wanted to talk about it. But why don't we start with this is kind of a standalone thing. This is my light meter or par meter. Basically, I can take this, and I love the remote one, so I don't have to have it by having this remote sensor instead of having the sensor right on the par meter. It's worth the extra 10 or 20 bucks because if you're trying to hold it under a light, it's really hard to read what's under it versus I can hold the sensor under the light, get a par reading. Like right now in this room, we are at, let's see if it's going to give me a reading here.
It's micromoles per meter squared.
Yeah, it's not even picking it up right now. I would guess I'm probably at like 50.
Yeah, I was going to say 150.
Yeah, 150 maybe, somewhere in that range. But really great for dialing in the distance from canopy for your light. Most light companies will have they'll have a chart that will give you a pretty good idea where you're at, but verifying it's always a good idea, and you'll find out where your hotspots are based on your light and what parts of your canopy might not be getting as much light. So it's just kind of a cool tool. They are expensive. I'm not convinced those iPhone apps or those Lux meters are really all that effective. So I'd either pony up for like one from Apogee, or this Sun System one has Apogee components, or I'd say just hold off and save your money.
What are we talking on price?
A couple $100. They're not cheap.
Okay, that's not as bad as I thought.
Okay, yeah. So again, this is not. This is just what I have in my pantry because I like to have it, but it's not a requirement by any means. So I don't want people to get hung up on that. There's many things I would spend $200 on before a light meter. Other cool tools though. So I think this is a requirement for everyone. Let me see if I can get close to the camera for you guys here. Just a simple jeweler's loop with a light on there. Everyone should have one of these and be scouting in their garden.
Do you know what the magnification is on it?
Yeah, this is a 40x on mine here. I like this style loop. My buddy and employee Brandon likes this one. I got this off of Amazon for like 20 bucks, I think. So it was a little bit more expensive, and it. Let me see if I can hold it up here. This has adjustable here, which I find hard to use looking down this little eyepiece. I'd rather have this eyepiece because it's a little bit larger when I'm scouting in a room. But it does also have a light here that you can turn on by pushing this button, so you can see the light. That's kind of a cool feature too. And again, this is a Carson, and like 20 bucks. But you need something that you can scout in the room. Now, if you want to go a step further, this is not really an in-room tool. But if you need to get verification of what your insect is, and you take a picture of it, this is a Dino Light. These are going to run you a couple $100 for a good one. There are some knockoffs on Amazon that could probably get you by. But like if you want to take a really good shot of whatever insect it is, or even of your trichomes and stuff like that, these things are awesome. They're just a really cool tool, and it's kind of fun if you have kids too. My daughter.
Do you know what magnification that is?
I think it goes. I'm looking at right here, 20 to 250.
Oh wow, that is a lot.
Looks like the range. Yeah, and the quality of the lens is really what you're paying for. And I noticed it makes a pretty big difference. So, yeah. That's all for looking at insects in terms of tools. Why don't you? I've been doing all the talking. Why don't you talk about what these are? Closer to the.
Yeah, cool.
You see that?
Yeah. So there's the one on the left is an analog tensiometer. The one on the right is a digital tensiometer. I'm assuming the one on the right is from not Blue Lab, Sustainable Village.
Barometer.
Blue Mats.
Oh. Blue Mat.
Yeah,
this is the Blue Mat one.
Because I've only actually seen, a handful of digital tensiometers. But to back up, tensiometers measure water tension. or essentially the energy it takes for a plant to pull water up. Um, they're much more accurate to what the plant is actually experiencing compared to the alternative water measurement, which is volumetric water. So essentially what percent of the volume of the soil is filled with water. They both, in my opinion, have their place, volumetric measurements versus tensiometers. But I think, yeah, I think outside, you want both ideally, but if you're just going to simplify to the essentials, I think one of those two that you just held up is great. If you get the earometer, which was the analog one, it's more accurate. That one that you have is the low tension, which is great for engineered peat-based medias. And it looks like it's 6-inch, which I highly prefer just because if you get the 12-inch one or even the 24-inch, you're measuring the bottom of a bed instead of the, yeah. And you can see there's a ceramic cone that
Yep.
is essentially, and that thing is filled with water. The cylinder is filled with water, and the tension outside that permeable cone is essentially putting energy to pull water out of that cone. Or if it's at full saturation, there's zero energy because it's sort of at equilibrium. And so that's what creates the dial movement, and that's water tension. Those two tools I've both, well, mostly the aerometer I've used extensively. My biggest complaint is just you got to keep them filled with water, because once you lose that vacuum seal or you get like a cavitation bubble in there, it's no longer accurate. So in an indoor environment where the humidity is pretty good and you're keeping your eye on things constantly, they work great. In an outdoor field setting where you walk away and you might not see it for weeks, you're just not paying attention, they can be a little bit finicky. And you can also get tensiometers that are much more advanced and wired, like Meter Group sells a tensiometer, but then you're talking $300. Anyway, that's the tensiometer.
Yeah. So I
summary.
got this. I got this aerometer on clearance from AM Leonard. AM Leonard, AL Leonard. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah.
It's a
I think
pretty popular
AM.
gardening site. Yeah,
$100
and it
bucks.
was 60, 70.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
it was pretty affordable at the time. That's why I pulled the trigger on it, because I already had these digital moisture meters. We sell them. Honestly, here's my issues with them. One, like you said, the water always has to be completely full. Um, Sometimes there's no way to really calibrate it that I'm aware of, and sometimes they can just be off. Like some of our facilities will have like 4 or 5 of these, and they'll read slightly different, which is frustrating.
Right.
This top part is not waterproof, which is a real pain in the ass when you're in a facility and you're trying to just keep things, like not having a waterproof tool that sits in your soil kind of sucks. Also, it takes a little while to give a reading. They say 20 minutes or something. I find 3 or 4 minutes you can get a pretty good reading on it. Um, but it's a good tool. But the reason I've kind of moved away from them is just honestly because of the price. They just keep going up. They've gone up like 30% since COVID,
How much is
40%.
the
It's just,
Sustainable Village one? Did you already say that?
yeah, I think I want to say it's like 80 or 90 bucks now, and it was like
Okay, got
50.
it.
So
I'll also add that
that's
it's someone asked a question. Matt asked a question about like the target level, 100 millibars. I think that's a great place to start. But I'm a huge believer that any moisture measurement should always be coupled with a field test, and you should be calibrating your optimal moisture based on your optimal feel. So determine what you want the feel of the soil to be, and then look at the tensiometers and average that out over multiple iterations, and that's what your target should be. Um, that's how I've always done it. Instead of
yeah,
relying on the number and the number only, I think you can get into trouble, even though technically the water tension is um, uncorrelated with soil texture, which is different than volumetric measurements. The soil texture is gonna in a lot of ways determine what your volumetric water is, but with tensiometers, it technically doesn't matter. I still think the field test is the number one way to continually measure moisture.
and it's always good to correlate that with your sense of touch and reach in, feel the soil with your hands, get an idea for what 80 M bar, 100 M bar, what these numbers kind of correlate with. I think that 100 M bar number, actually was established by my good friend Jaya Palmer in our soil, and that's what Blue Mats ran with. So that's, if you're using KISS soil, then yeah, that's a pretty good place to start. If your media is a different composition of cocoa or peat or compost, um, it might be a little too dry or a little too wet, but it's a good starting point for a conversation. And we have some growers that run 80, and some that will even go as low as 60, which is wetter as we get with a lower number. So it's going to vary based on your
I- I'll
setup.
also I'll also add one detail that I have found, which is that if you take the measurement in the top 4 inches of soil versus the bottom 4 inches of a bed or a pot, they can be wildly different. So it kind of depends on where you're measuring. And so I've started recommending two tensiometers at different depths just so you can see the variation, because otherwise you're just seeing one specific depth level and you're optimizing for one depth. And so unless you've really thought that through, I'm really trying to nail 100 millibars at 6 inches. It's going to be different than if you're
Yeah,
keeping it at 100 millibars at 1 inch or 2 inches versus at 24 inches or 12 inches. So anyway,
that's a really good point. Yeah, I usually push this thing down about 6 inches into the soil when I do it, but I should probably make a mark on this so I'm consistently hitting the same point.
totally,
That's a really
totally.
good pointer.
Well, I think
Yeah,
in between 5 and 6, whatever, but what I would do is I would throw a hole in the bottom of a fabric bed and throw one in the bottom. I think it's always like quite shocking to see the difference between the bottom and the top.
cool, cool. So in the spirit of meters and measuring things, this is brand new. I actually discovered this from you. We're going to add them to our website. I just bought 10 of them as a trial
Cool.
to sell to growers. Um, I can talk briefly about it and you can jump in, but it's called a Blue Lab Pulse Meter. They retail for like $350, which is crazy expensive. It's not going to be for everyone. We're selling them for $250, I think, right now. Just trying to make them as affordable as we can, run a smaller margin. But what they do that is really cool is they measure water moisture percentage, is a little different equation, but could give you an idea of the amount of moisture in your soil. They measure pH, which we've already talked about how it's good. It's a good to know pH. They can measure these things in soil or in solution, and it measures soil temperature, which is probably less useful in an indoor facility, but outdoors would be really important. And it measures EC, so we know how much fertility is in the soil too. So for a grower that has a lot of pots, you can literally, and this is adjustable right here, so I can hit the same level in a pot every single time, and I could go around and see if one pot's dry or if one pot has lower EC or something like that. It's just a really cool tool that I think has probably more applications for a commercial grower, or for us, like mixing soil, for example. I can take this there and uh, push it into a soil pile and say, oh, okay, well, this is my temperature in that compost pile. This is my EC in there. I know that the soil has the fertility that I'm expecting it to have. I know the pH is dropped into the range that I want. And Thomas, yeah, I can verify this does do pH. I see your question, your comment on there. So it measures four things, and it sends it all to your phone, and then it tracks the historical data of that on
Yeah,
here
so
too.
this is my Pulse app, and this
Oh,
was me
cool.
troubleshooting a neighbor's farm because he was having crop health issues, and I never use my Pulse. I went over there with my Pulse. That's moisture, and what I found interesting was the EC measurements. Like you see that blue block of, the EC will vary between each point you poke, but you're looking for an average. So the beauty of the Pulse to me is you can take 20 data points really, really, really quickly and just look at the average and see it graphed. Um, I also really like it because it's sharp. And so what I said about taking measurements at the bottom of a bed, you can poke that through fabric pots or beds and get the EC at the bottom of the pot. Because I think often what happens is nutrients leach to the bottom of the soil profile, but they don't actually leave the effective root zone. And so you can get like a nutrient, I don't want to call it stratification, but a nutrient buildup in the bottom of a bed or a pot. So you could see EC really, really high at the bottom, but not at the top. And so this thing, you just walking around taking tons of measurements very quickly. And mine doesn't do pH. It only, so that might be a newer one. They might have added pH.
Really? I swear it had pH on there.
You're probably
Now I
right.
gotta go
I
back
just
and
know
look
mine doesn't.
online.
Um,
Am I misspeaking?
it's okay.
Maybe
It doesn't.
Dude, Thomas, you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I swear. I
Shout
thought
out to
this had
Thomas. But I
pH.
mean, yours might be. I mean, they're constantly changing these things, and I bought mine like 4 years ago. So
I'm gonna have to go back and check that.
don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Let's yeah. It's what it's like.
All right,
it's
moving
kinda
on though. Thank you,
whatever.
Thomas. I appreciate it. Good. Hey, call me out if I get it wrong. Yeah, thank you, man. Oh, and just to throw this out here, you know, Bryant and I are not social media people. I do believe it helps it out if you do like the live. I think it gets more folks to find out about us. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for that. By the way, he did. Yeah, I like that question. So again, so the pulse is a volumetric moisture measurement, not water tension. So it's that second kind of actually more common measurement than a tensiometer. And the percentage that you're aiming for completely depends on soil texture and it also depends on if you're trying to run it right below field capacity or at 60% of field capacity. All I can say is I have hyper calibrated my soil, which is a sandy loam or a sandy clay loam. And I like to have it at 27%. But again, you got to calibrate it to your soil based on feel. So
I
keep
will
feeling
get
your
you guys a
soil.
number with KISS soil.
Yeah,
give you
get
an
a
idea
number
for
for
at least
KISS.
for potting soil in general. I say KISS soil, but
Yeah, I
potting
wonder.
soil.
I don't want to look on my phone. I've done
And
a ton
I'll
of.
calibrate it with the blue map moisture meter so I can see 80 M bars is approximately this percentage of moisture. So
That's the way to do it. Totally.
I haven't done it yet. I just received this thing like last week, so I'm excited to play around with it. All right. Well, since we're talking about meters, I had a pH pen, and then this is an EC meter here. Again, we've already talked about this. It's a nice thing to have on hand. I actually bought, so this was just kind of for fun. I bought a really cheap pH pen and a really cheap EC meter off of TikTok. I think I spent a total of like maybe $15 on both. And I'm super curious to see how accurate they are. If they're remotely, I think the pH pen was like $5. So it was more just for fun. But I'm curious to see, you know, I have to calibrate them and stuff. It came with everything that would come in on the kit. So we'll see. But
honestly,
pH,
that's a really good experiment in my opinion. Because if we can get these instruments for $10 and they work, then that's a massive learning for everyone.
Yeah. So again, kind of the EC tells you your overall fertility of the soil. It doesn't tell you what's creating that fertility, but like if that number is low, you'll realize, okay, I just need to raise the fertility in my soil. That's why my plant looks the way it does. Or if it's exceedingly high, then it gives you an idea that, oh, I have too many nutrients in here. I may need to consider leaching. And then if you can get a soil test to figure out what those constituent elements are, and then really balance and dial things in. But like
does that go directly into soil? Sorry to interrupt you, Tad.
Yeah. So what we've done in the past is I've done like a slurry. So I'll use distilled water, or I'll use the water where I saw a source where I know the ppms of the water, and then I will add about 50-50 soil and water, and then I will stir that up, put my meter in, and then that will give me a reading. They'll give me an idea of where I'm at. So solution sort of thing.
Yeah, paste. Logan adds water until it's a pancake batter-like consistency. It's almost 50-50 usually, depending on how dry the soil is. So it sounds similar. I haven't done a slurry. I have a pulse to jump in. I have a pulse, or not a pulse meter. I'm sorry, a Blue Mat soil pH pen that you can actually throw into the soil. Blue Lab. What did I say? Blue Mat? Jeez, so many of these names.
They're all the same. Yeah.
Blue Lab. Okay, Blue Lab. I've got an EC pen for solution, a pH pen for solution, and this is when I'm doing nutrient solutions, but mostly foliars. When I do foliar solutions, I'm very type A about the EC and the pH for uptake efficiency. So I have solution only pens, and then Blue Lab sells a soil pen that you can throw directly in. But so I've never done the slurry, but that's a cool idea too. I mean, whatever works.
Yeah. So just it's another tool. Again, all of these things are not necessarily things that you must have, except for I think a loop. So far, this is the only must-have thing that we've talked about. But they're kind of fun tools that give you more information about what you have going on. All right, I think that's it for the tools. Let's clear these out of the way here and move on to other stuff. And again, this list is this is just what I had literally in my garden pantry today. I have another list here of like my favorite products that I like to keep on hand for like NPK and stuff like that. But the first thing I think everyone should have, and that I'll admit I'm not good at this, but it's a journal tracking when you own your room, what you're doing. So, you know, when you transplant, what you watered with, if you add anything to the water, tracking those dates, how your plants look, and then if you take photos with your phone, you can correlate the date to what is going on in your journal. But I think super important. Everyone should do it. If you have anything to add to that.
I was just thinking, I went on a sort of a rabbit hole. My systems are very digital. So I was just thinking like, where are all of my cultivation notes? And it's a combination of like Google Calendar, because I have a seasonal cultivation journal. And so every month I write down like everything I should be thinking about in February and everything I should be doing in February. And then so I have the seasonal calendar, and then I have a series of like online journals. But yeah, I mean, what I have found is the more writing and the more observations and the more journaling, the better. Like straight up, it's the most valuable resource to go back and read it from 2 years ago or a year ago or whatever, and see if you're seeing the same things happen. So yeah, I just support what you're saying. I don't know. I don't have too much else to offer.
Yeah, and then if you have an issue, you can go back and look at what sorts of things you applied, and
I also have
you can track your
spreadsheets
pest
for, like,
pressure. Yeah.
yeah, pest pressure, rates, application rates, foliar rates, soil amendments. Like every application you make should 100% be documented.
Cool. Why don't we stay with IPM, because we kind of started there. This is, well, let me start with this. So Monterey horticultural oil. This is made by a company called Brandt. You can buy it on Amazon or Home Depot. It is Sufoil X. You will not find that information anywhere online, but I swear to you, that's what it is.
Cool.
It's just a different branding, retail branding for it. Because like for me, I don't need as much. I don't need a big, gallon or 5-gallon size. This is perfect for a cycle or two for me. It's a oil-based spray, very low phyto, like you're not risking phytotoxicity. Your actual application, it's mineral oil based. That your actual application is very small, and the way that the oil is suspended in the product allows you to apply less of it than other products. It's just a great all around product, honestly. Now, some people are not comfortable using mineral oil. Now, I use Vaseline and things like that, so I'm personally okay with using small amounts. And again, the residue levels on this, it's not really an issue, things like that. But there's a new product out. You might not even heard of this, Bryant. This is a sample of it here. If you guys can see that, it's called EpiShield. It's made by Bioworks or distributed by Bioworks. It was formulated by an entomologist. It is a 25B product. It is derived from a variety of different essential oils. And there's a lot of products like this on the market, but the difference is this one has a ton of research behind it, and efficacy, and I'm just really excited for it. The issue I have with it is it's $300 a liter. But a liter for a grower like myself in this, at least for the grow that I have here, would last me like a decade. So it's not very practical. I'm trying to get him to come out with a smaller size. Like honestly, a couple of these would be perfect.
Do you know what the application rate is?
Yeah, I have it right here. So foliar, you're looking at 2.7 to 3.5 milliliters per gallon.
Oh,
So
wow,
this
it's
bottle will
tiny.
do 30 to 40 gallons of spray solution.
Yeah.
I would pay $20 for this and happily have enough for my grow. They have a dip rate on this at 2.7 milliliters per gallon, which is really great that they're able to. So Sufoil has a dip rate in Canada. It does not have one on the label in the US. They haven't been able to get that through the EPA yet, even though they have research to support it. Whereas this one, because it's a 25B product, they can put a dip rate right on it. So yeah, and it smells quite nice.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a cool product. So
that's a new one. I'm happy you're sharing that. That's good to know. I'd say every 3 years I could do a deep dive on like all the major companies and what products they have. And so it's good to hear an update.
Yeah. And then along those lines, a little bit different. This is a product called Bioceres. It's produced by Anatis. You're nodding your head. It's a Bavaria product. And Bavaria has it's a myco-insecticide. It has a ton of benefits. These guys just came out with a new product. I have it in the other room, but it's giant, massive. It looks like a bag of chicken feed or dog food, but it's a granular Bavaria, which would be really cool because it's going to have more microbial persistence for dealing with things like root aphids. So you could literally mix it into your soil as a way of battling or preventing root aphids, which is always so hard to get rid of in a grow. So very cool company. A lot of research behind it. The most common one that most people know is Botanigard. That's another great product out there that is Bavaria. So, yeah.
I don't have anything to add. I think that was a good summary.
Okay. Yes. The Bioworks, both of these are oil-based sprays. So yes, they are both oil-based. I like to use them only in veg, maybe a week or two max into flower, but well before pistil formation. And also as dips. So it's always a good idea, especially if you're going to use beneficials too, to come in first with an oil. And with things like these two products, you can bring in your beneficials literally the next day as soon as the product is dry. You can't do that with all oil-based sprays, and absolutely never mix oil and sulfur.
Yeah. I was just going to say, like last live, I'm just realizing that last live, someone asked about compatibilities of foliars, nutritional foliars and IPM. And I said, oh, be careful of oil. Now that I think about it, it's only oil and sulfur. Like you just said, oil pretty much mixes well with every other nutrient and shouldn't create any phytotoxicity. It's just sulfur. So I'm glad you said that because I realized I sort of misspoke last live. I want to clarify.
And if you're using a product like this, you can go to Bioworks directly. They distribute Sufoil, and they can tell you what compatibility is for pretty much anything that you can think of on the market because they've done all that testing. You can't do that with every oil-based product or 25B product out there. So the level of support with a company like Bioworks is really great. And no, I don't sell any of these products. I would love to sell Bioworks products, but I do not at the moment. So, all right, moving on.
Yeah, let's do it. What's up next?
All right, well, let's see. I had one more sort of IPM, but also fertility thing here. I don't know if you can read this. It's Excel 68,
oh, yeah, totally.
potassium silicate. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, all I can say is that when it's my understanding from an organic standpoint is that when it's used for IPM, it's allowed in organics. When it's used for nutrition, it's not. If anyone cares, the main mode of action, in my understanding, is it's just a really high pH product that's kind of caustic, if you will, to different pathogens. So how it's usually applied would be like a foliar application to reduce fungal pathogens on the leaf surface. That's my understanding of it from an IPM standpoint. The secondary nutritional advantage of that is it's a very highly effective source of silica for the plant nutritionally. Obviously gives a little bit of potassium too. So silica strengthens cell walls and increases abiotic stress resistance. And so a lot of growers I know prefer to use potassium silicate over potassium sulfate, both as a soil drench and as a foliar product, because you're getting silica and not more sulfate, which usually isn't needed beyond what we're already applying. So yeah, now the IPM, you might want to add more to the IPM because that's my very base understanding of it.
Yeah.
It's 7 or 8 times more expensive per unit of potassium than potassium sulfate. So even if you want to use it for nutrition and you want to apply it to your soil, again, it's not organic. Technically, you're paying quite a bit more, but if you need silica, it's a good source.
Yeah, the issue is it's really hard to get available silica, and we could probably do a whole thing on talking about silicon. Actually, I think it's really fascinating. But this is a great way to get an affordable form of it. You can, with a pound of this, make your own version of essentially Dynagrow Protect, and get it a lot more affordably. So yeah, so the big reason I like it is for the availability of the silicone, and it has a lot of the benefits. You already listed a ton of them. It helps. It helps with so many different things. So it's one of those things that I would almost consider an essential nutrient. I did a whole
Yeah,
podcast with Dr. Wendy
it should
Zellner
be.
on it. Yeah. Um, because certain forms of silicone, I always say it, I always do that. Silicon are not readily available. Like silicon dioxide, which is like quartz or sand, is just not going to become available in the timeline that we want. So that's where something like this is really handy. I don't even really count the potassium in this, and I'd be curious your thoughts because we're only using like a half a
Yeah.
teaspoon to a teaspoon per gallon. I think
Yeah.
it's really negligible for potassium, but yeah, like I said, the main benefit is silicon, and I don't care about the fact. Yes, it's approved for foliar, but not for soil drench. I use it for soil drenches, but
yeah, that's totally fine. I think I'm just, I mean, I work with a lot of people who are certified in the ag world, so they have to be careful. Yeah, the amount of potassium foliar applied, negligible. If you're replacing potassium sulfate, you're applying a lot of that as a soil drench, and it's the point often is to get a lot of potassium. So soil drench, you should do the math. I think it's like 70% or 80% of the potassium sulfate. So what is it, like 30% or something? I don't know. Again, foliar
32.
applications. Okay.
Yeah. But you're using a very, very small amount of this too. So
yeah.
By the time
Cool. I'm glad I didn't even know you offered that. That's good to know, especially in small quantities.
Yeah, we sell it by the pound just for the reason that it's so affordable if you buy it as a powder versus buying it as a liquid. One thing to know about it though, if you are going to mix it with water, put it in a plastic container, like a milk jug. Put half the water in there first. Wear your proper PPE, and then pour this in to make the concentrate. It actually makes like an exothermic reaction of heat up. So you want to have water already in the container before you add this. It's just a little tip.
Cool. That's good.
Moving on. Let's see what else I have.
So Ted, I can do one more and then I got to jump off. So let's choose a good one.
Okay, I'll let you pick then. I have biochar, worm castings, insect frass, or microbial products.
Let's do worm castings.
All right. So this is just an example of worm castings that I have here. Tell me about it then. Why do you like having worm castings around?
Yeah, castings can, in my experience, can be the single best form of, let's just call it compost. I put it in the category of compost in the sense that it's supplying nutrients, but microbially, it's just like the most superior substance ever. I've used them as an extract. And I just think castings, like if you can afford and work in castings into your soil, it's just like such a great source of organic material. I have found wildly varying quality of castings. And in fact, I applied, I'm not going to name where I got them, but I applied some castings to some plants without testing it. And the nitrate in the castings was like 400 ppm. Anyway, I gave my plants an enormous nitrogen feed way later than I thought with just a small amount of castings. And so, really, like any compost, it depends on what the worms ate and kind of the system and the process that goes into making the castings. So, a good castings is like gold, in my opinion. And then there's a whole spectrum all the way down to garbage. So, um, I'm sure yours are high quality. I should have bought yours. That's the takeaway.
So the reason this bag is full, I'll just be brutally honest. We no longer sell these because the latest test I got, the chlorides have risen to the point where I wasn't impressed with them. So
Yeah,
that's
damn.
why this bag is here. The ones that I like are we have these African worm castings that we still sell, and I think are awesome. Um, but yeah, this bag's full, and I'm not going to apply it to my plants just because the sodium and the chlorides in them got the last batch I got I didn't like. So yeah,
I
but
think it really
I think
depends on. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I think you're right. Like overall, I'd say the quality is there, but you're right, it varies so much.
Yeah, the biggest issue is just based on how you have to produce them. They are expensive per unit. So if you're a small grower, great. If you're a large grower, not going to happen um, at scale over time. I mean, maybe a one-time application, great, but as your primary source of compost is just too expensive. I really think the quality depends on. I mean, if you think about food scraps, if you're just feeding like tons of food scraps, that's that the nutrient levels, the sodium, the chloride are just going to be super high. And then the other thing that I think about is how much water is essentially going through the castings and hitting the worms and leaching out of the system, because that helps put downward pressure on some of the chlorides and more mobile things. So if you're in a kind of a very efficient system that's not leaching any water through the material and you're feeding them a very nutrient rich diet, you're going to have crazy levels of all kinds of things. So um, microbially they're still good, but you're going to create excesses on the nutrient side. So yeah, castings are
Where
tricky,
I
but
see
they
it
can be.
with the
Yeah, go ahead.
castings is the manure based ones.
Oh,
That's where
interesting.
I think you get that's where you get higher NPK levels. And you also, this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately with this talk I'm working on for the soil summit that we're going to be at is antibiotics. A lot of the things that are a lot of the things that the animals are fed are going to end up in the manure. In fact, most of it is going to end up in the manure as waste, and so that's where we need to be careful about our. I think we need to be more concerned about our compost sources than we do about our fertilizer sources. We need to
100%.
separate those two.
100%.
So
Also, if you just think about the volume of each of those, it's an order of magnitude difference in terms of what we're putting in. So, and just to your point, yes, compost can and manure based compost can be totally gnarly. You guys, I gotta run. Um, Tad, you should answer this question.
yeah, I got some time. I'll keep going, and maybe we can catch up with this topic again next
Totally.
time.
Let's just pick up where we left off. I'd
Yeah.
also just urge everyone to stay on and listen to the last few products, which I know a few of
Uh,
those intimately well. I've used them like for years. So, anyway, thanks, Tad.
yeah, and a lot of the stuff that I think you need is on this list, and maybe I'll post it in the comments. But they're not products I have in front of me. Like, if I had to say like two things real quick, just that I would have in my garden, like gypsum is something that I think every gardener should have in their toolbox, and probably like fishbone meal or bone meal. Um, so
Love
like
it.
I don't have them in front of me, but like we could talk about it next time. But I know you got to run. I really appreciate you fitting this in today, and
Yeah,
we'll
sorry I
keep
didn't
going
have
for a
more
little bit.
time, but I like wasn't gonna miss it. I love these conversations. So anyway, thanks everybody.
So yeah, I'll keep going, guys, for a little bit longer here. As long as you have questions and people want to hang out, I can keep going. So yeah, EWC with cow manure. In general, cow manure and horse manures are not my favorite compost sources, just based on what they tend to be fairly low in fertility, I guess I would say. And there's nothing about them microbially that I'm like super excited about. But if you can get them, locally sourced and affordably, and they're of decent quality, and you know what the feedstock was, the cows were fed, then it's a great option. I've actually used horse manure as a base for worm cast or for making worm castings. It's a wonderful bedding, just and great thing for using to just make your own castings if you want to make your own worm castings. I filled some giant 200-gallon smart pots with the first one I did with horse manure, and I didn't even have to inoculate with worms because it came with the worms because they'd been on the soil. And then I did two more next to it under a covered area with the Holy Mountain fish compost, and I let the worms work it for a year or two. And the compost, the earthworm castings that came out of there were really nice. But ideally, if you're making castings, you want to force the worms to work a small volume of food feedstock of a compost or bedding, and make them fully digested. Because if one way to just look at quality with worm castings is you want to see like little tiny balls essentially on your hands when you take that castings out, and that's what the poop is actually going to look like. If you're seeing a lot of other stuff in there, then it tells me that the castings are not as pure and they haven't been screened well, or the worms have not worked that material as thoroughly as we would like it to. Because there's no standard for what people are calling worm castings. So yeah, well, I'll talk about a few more things that I have here, and we'll just see how it goes. So this is probably my favorite newer amendment that I've added to my garden the last few years. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's insect press. And when we talk about sustainability and closing the loop, it's one of the best things out there for that, but it's also one of the cleanest. I have yet to see insect frass from any of the sources, whether it was mealworm or cricket or black soldier fly, that was high in heavy metals. It tends to have a pretty good NPK right around 222 or 322. And it's known to have chitin in there, which in theory can activate that chitinase pathway in the plant and increase systemic acquired resistance, which is sort of the plant's immune system and ability to fight off pathogens and pests. And yeah, it's a great option. So unfortunately, we were working with Beta Hatch. I did a whole podcast with Dr. Virginia Emery. They went out of business. And then we were working with another company out of Vancouver prior to that called Intera Feed that made black soldier fly frass. They went out of business. We're talking to a few other companies trying to find another good source of insect frass, but there's a lot out there. I just KISS right now is next to finding a new one. But if you can get good quality insect frass, by all means, I think this is one of the best things to add to your garden. Let's see what else. I don't even know what else I have here. Biochar. So just like castings, biochar can vary a lot in quality. This company, Black Owl, is probably my favorite in the industry because I know the owners. I know that they're making a really clean product. And the difference between biochar and charcoal is biochar is pyrolyzed, so which means that they're heating it up to really, really high temperatures at very, very low oxygen conditions. And biochar will help in tying up heavy metals, retaining nutrients in the soil. And frankly, I have side-by-side photos I've seen from growers at Gold Leaf that showed about 8 to 9% better growth and yield by adding the biochar to the soil. Let me see if I can hold up so you guys can see it here a little bit, but it's just gonna look like charcoal, and your particle size is gonna make a big difference in terms of surface area and availability. It is alkaline, so it's gonna raise your pH, and that's something to account for when you're using it. But it's a great all around product, and we use it at 5 to 8% range by volume total in our soils. If you're adding it to your soil at the beginning of the grow or when you're re-amending, you don't need to do anything. It'll charge itself. If you are adding it while you have plants or mid-cycle or top dressing, you'll want to mix it in with something that has some nitrogen in it. That could be some blood meal, a compost tea, really just about anything, but you don't want to add it by itself. Um, but you do need to charge biochar because it's going to be more efficient at pulling nitrogen out of your soil due to the high carbon source than your plant is. And so if you were to like, if I were to take this and just dump it around a plant that I had out in my yard, in theory, it could rob nitrogen from the plant. So, and yeah, so I think I answered the buffering question. And then Tim brought up a good point. Oops. And there it is. Biochar helps hold water too. It's excellent for water retention. So yes, high quality biochar is great. You can make your own if you want to go down that path. There's absolutely ways to do that. I have heard horror stories about some companies not having clean wood stock, like even burning things like pressure treated or scrap wood that could have other chemicals and things in there. So be really careful about your source of where you're getting it. Let's see. Would you add biochar to peat moss? Absolutely. So we use it in our soil our biochar soil is like 43% peat moss and then 8% biochar. So yes, we do absolutely add it there, and that's what I've been talking about when I use it. So yeah, that's a great question. Let's see here. Does frass expire quickly? I have not ever heard that, Drew. It's possible that some of the beneficial microbes in here will die off over time. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of them would probably go dormant. The nutrient in there won't go anywhere. It's not disappearing. I wouldn't be overly concerned about that because I just find microbes in general are really resilient, and they should survive for the most part. But yeah, so that was kind of the quick one on biochar. I've done whole podcasts on it if people are interested. This is the sample. Moving on to another product. This is Mammoth Pea. It's a microbial product. Like I said, this is a sample. I had a bunch of these that were expiring, so I used them in my grow this season. We've moved away from Mammoth Pea over to microbial mass. They're both pea solubilizing microbial consortiums. It's a handful to say. They'll just help make pea and other nutrients, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, a bunch of those things more available to the plant. That's why you can add them. They're not something that I think is a requirement by any means, but they are something that's very safe to use and should give a good boost to your overall plant health, vigor, and yield. And there's nothing wrong with Mammoth Pea as a product. The reason we've moved away from them is more personal ones relating to sort of their company mission and who's running the company now. Their original founder, Colin, who was a good friend of mine, is no longer with the company. He's actually with Microbial Mass. And I know the formulators of a Microbial Mass who originally created that product, and I really like them. So that's why we made the switch. But either way, both are good products. And there's a lot of biostimulants on the market. You do have to do your research, but yeah, it's something that I feel good about adding to my garden. Let's see. I'll do a few more things that I have here, and I won't make it through this whole list. But this is our nutrient pack. Since I am a business, I figure I would throw that in there. And I'll get back to your question, John. That's a great question. If you don't want to have fish meal, bone meal, rock dust, all of these different things in your pantry, or if you want to mix your own soil, this is just a good option that we formulate ourselves. You can add it to something like Happy Frog or Pro Mix and make your own version of a living soil. We give you the recipes for all that. Or if you have a soil that you're recycling and you're not going to do soil testing and you want something that's going to be just a good way to generally raise your fertility, that's why we created this product. Because realistically, shipping soil around the country is really, really hard to do. It's expensive, and yeah, so that's why we use this. For example, in my outdoor vegetable garden, it's literally, I'm looking out the window and it's raining right now. I know that the level of fertility in my raised bed's going to be quite low at the end of the season in spring when I go to plant. So rather than soil test, I'll just add something like this as a general fertilizer as a way to raise fertility overall, get all our major micro and macronutrients back into the soil. So since I have a business, I figured I had to mention it. Couple things I don't have in front of me that I wanted to talk about, and then I'll answer this question, is my favorite bottled nutrient and thing that I think, Brian and I talked about, like, what do you really have to have in your pantry? And for me, one of those things is fish hydrolysate. It gives you available phosphorus. It's a good, just like all around grow formula. And it's really affordable. Make sure you get hydrolysate and not emulsion. And you can pick this up literally anywhere. I mean, we do sell it on our website, but you should be able to find it at pretty much every nursery, garden center, grow shop, places like that. And that's just something that I think everyone should have, because if you're growing primarily in this living soil style, and you have a plant issue where you realize you're low on nitrogen, or you need a little bit of phosphorus or something like that, that's the best way to get it in there and get it done. So I had to mention fish hydrolysate, even though I don't have any here on me. Going back to John's question, though, will Mammoth Pea survive in soil, or does it need to be added every week? That's a great question. I asked Colin that exact question. He was the founder and creator of this product. And essentially what you're asking about is microbial persistence. How well do these microbes persist in the soil? And unfortunately, the answer is not well. You will have some in there, but not at the concentrations that you would get if you add this product weekly. So when we're talking about like increasing yield or phosphorus cycling and things like that, you would need to use these products a lot more regularly at higher concentrations. You will get some level of persistence, but you're not going to get the same level of benefit that you would if you were to use it, on a weekly or bi-weekly schedule. So yeah, it's a great question. Now, this stuff's not cheap, so realistically, that may not be in the cards, and you may decide, okay, I just want to use it one cycle, and if I keep my soil moist and I treat it well, some of the bacteria will survive. I actually did a microscope video with Mammoth Pea, feeding them different food sources and seeing which of the consortia of microbes survived and which ones didn't, or which ones dominated the solution afterwards. And you can feed them. I would do something like a alfalfa meal or unsulfured molasses, or a combination of the two, as a way of kind of keeping the microbes as alive as possible. Yeah. Let's see. How much fish hydrolysate per gallon of soil during flowering? I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll be honest. I typically just go off the label rates on the back of the bottles, so I wouldn't go off list there in terms of application rates. I would just go off what the bottle has, because you can always apply it more frequently. So you can use it one watering, see how it responds, and then you could always use it again the next watering. It's a pretty safe nutrient to add and use. I hope that kind of answers your question, Andy. Okay, a few other products, and then we'll call it good. And then I'll just read you this list of things, and then maybe when Bryant is available next week, we can talk about it more in depth. But I had to bring the shovel. I've mentioned it on my Instagram before. I freaking love this thing. You cannot find this thing anywhere. I have searched. It's like an old style, like coal shovel. But why I love it so much is because it's not light, so it's not aluminum. It's got a sturdy handle. We've actually damaged this part a little bit, and I need to get it repaired. But it's a larger scoop, and so if you're scooping out of a tote or out of the back of a truck, or even the back of a wheelbarrow, this size and shape is just so handy. And the fact that this part is curved allows you to get a better scoop. Those straight edged ones just don't get underneath or into a pile well. And so, like, my dad and I literally fight over who gets to keep this shovel at their house. And I'm looking. I've seen some leads on some potential shovels that are similar to this, but I've never found one exactly like it. It's just the perfect size. So had to throw that out there, is what I have in my pantry. And then a couple other things. And this list was something that I put together with Brandon Hudson, who works over at KISS as well. Some other things that he loves that he put on his thing is trichoderma, something like a root shield product. Um, Other microbial products like compost teas. Castings can be used as a top dress or mixed into the soil or for making teas. When we talk about different NPK products, so if we're re-amending our soil for nutrients, if we're adding nitrogen, nitrates, specifically blood meal, feather meal, alfalfa meal, soybean meal, crustacean meal. There's various amino forms of nitrogen that you can get. All of those things are good nitrogen sources. You don't need all of them. Sometimes having two is really nice. I like to typically use alfalfa meal and then one other source like blood or feather. For phosphorus, we're looking at bone meal or fish bone meal or soft rock phosphate. Calphos is just a brand of soft rock phosphate. The thing with phosphorus to keep in mind is you're never going to get phosphorus by itself. You're always going to pick up some calcium, and you're probably going to get some heavy metals if you're looking at soft rock phosphate. So that's something to watch out for too. For calcium, we already talked a little bit about gypsum, but it's one of those things I think everyone should have in their garden and have available to them. Other calcium sources are dolomite lime, which we don't tend to recommend very often. Oyster shell flour, which is calcium carbonate, or egg lime. Those are probably our main calcium sources. And then you're also getting calcium from things like fish bone meal and other products that you're adding for other NPK things. Now, magnesium, we don't ever add magnesium products to our soil. Like I won't really add dolomite lime or sulpomag to my soil mix, which is also known as K-Mag. But what I will have on hand is just a little bit of Epsom salt in case I need to do a foliar or a soil drench because it's so easy to add magnesium. That's a great way to do that. For sulfur, we're picking up sulfur from gypsum. We can add elemental sulfur if we need to lower the pH of the soil slowly over time. That's a great tool for that. Or if I was growing blueberries, for example, in my kiss soil, I'd want to add sulfur to lower the pH there. And then various other sulfates are going to give us sulfur. So I tend to not worry about sulfur, but it's crucial for getting good terpene expression and things like that. A lot of our VOCs are contain a sulfur element to them. All right, I'll get on to trace minerals. How long does it take gypsum to become plant available? Depends on the gypsum. And primarily when I talk about that, it's about the particle size of the gypsum. So if it's a very fine powder, it's going to have a greater surface area. It's going to be more available to the plant. So if it's a soluble gypsum, it's going to be pretty much instantly available. And the great thing about gypsum is that the solubility of it is the release rate of gypsum is pretty much ideal for your plant. So you can't really over apply, and you're going to get gypsum at a perfect rate to maintain calcium levels throughout the length of your growth. Let's see what else. So trace minerals, you can get your traces in sulfate form, whether that's copper sulfate, iron sulfate, manganese sulfate, borax or boron. You can also get these trace minerals from rock dust. I don't really like to use any of these products unless I absolutely can see visually and have a soil test to back up that I need to add trace minerals. And you should probably get into this with Bryant because he's much freer with adding trace minerals than I am. But it's something to be very careful of because when you get too high with some of these trace minerals, like specifically boron, for example, you can completely destroy your soil. So be very careful. Other products, we already talked about egg seal. I talked about fish hydrolysate. I talked about having like a complete fertilizer on hand if you just need to add overall fertility. If you need to pH your water, something like phosphoric acid or citric acid. For calcium, elastinite. Probably one of my favorite calcium supplements now too, because it's calcium silicate. I don't know how I forgot that one. So that's another good option. So if I were making a soil, I would probably use elastinite and gypsum as my main two calcium sources in a recipe for adding calcium. Other things, you could have a dechlorinator to deal with chlorine or chloramine in your water. And then I kind of went over a lot of the pH meters and other types of meters at the beginning of this that we're using or have available. And yeah, that's what I have in my garden pantry. I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. And next week we'll get Bryant back on here and tackle some more questions. And I am doing a live also with Chad Westbrook on Tuesdays, talking more about home growing and cultivation basics. Whereas with Bryant, we're probably going to go a little deeper dive and probably talk more about large scale and things like that. So yeah. All right, I'll see you have one more question from Strong Style Organics here. Yeah, so calcium carbonate is going to raise your pH. That's the biggest probably downfall to it, and that's why gypsum is so nice. Now, I use a little bit of calcium carbonate in the form of egg lime to raise the pH of my soil because I'm starting with peat moss, and I want to hit a range of 6.8 to 7 for pH, and so that egg lime is a nice way to raise that. But I'm also raising it with these other amendments that contain cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and so I'm getting a bump from that. My biochar is raising my overall pH, and that's why I like to start with peat moss, is because you start so low, you can add all this fertility to it. Whereas if I was starting with cocoa, which you're already at a neutral pH of close to 7, you don't have that room to go up that you do when you start with peat moss, where you're at 4.5, for example. So there's a lot more room to raise pH. So, all right, guys, appreciate you guys all tuning in. I'm super grateful, and yeah, we'll talk again soon. Thanks.